الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Are you recording this?
Yeah, we're told to.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, because they said that they would coordinate with the MSA, so inshallah khair. Jazakumullah khair for coming. I guess the feeling of being on campus is something that I miss very much. You guys have an opportunity here that will pass, and taking advantage of this opportunity before it goes is extremely critical. And of course, you know, there's different opportunities for your voice and different causes for your voice. What I will say though, from the perspective of the Quran, is that learning the Quran and the message of the Quran at this time is obvious, just like every other time is important, but especially at these times, because a lot of people are actually inquiring now about the Quran. They're inquiring about Islam and the things that are happening to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and abroad. Are causing people to start questioning the system, starting to question the status quo that they've grew up and lived through many years. And now is the time to take advantage of that opportunity and to educate ourselves so that we can be better equipped, both for obviously for us, but certainly for a dawah perspective as well. Start of part 2. Of the tafsir that we initiated last year. So can I just get a quick show of hands? Because I know who the credit students are because they're registered, but who attended last year? Maybe at least 50% of the time. Okay, very good. Okay, so about half the class. And you don't need to have attended last year to attend this year. It's not a prerequisite. I will talk inshallah and mainly about the sections that Juz Amma covers. Right. Before we start, let's do some housekeeping. Maybe another show of hands. How many people here are registered for credit? Very few. Okay. So I do encourage you to register for credit for the IDA. You don't have to. Certainly, you can audit the course. I think it's a good way to hold yourself accountable and to make sure that if you miss something that you go and learn it. It's not really, you know, at the end of the day, you can also do it. You can take the assignments, the assessments as an audit student. If you have the discipline to do so, go ahead if you don't want to register. But certainly to make sure that you push yourself and learn it and even go through the evaluations to see how well you understand it, I think is useful. So consider becoming a credit student, and of course as part of the IDA, and I don't have too much time today to talk about the IDA in general, so if you want to learn more about the IDA, I can certainly talk to you inshallah ta'ala. And we actually have, I think, Ali, you could probably even speak about the IDA as well from your experience with helping kind of organize the classes and courses through wellness. Normally I have another screen, but this is going to be a little bit awkward. So we're going to be covering from Surah 91, inshallah, Surah Shams, till the end. Surah Shams we did cover. It was the last surah we covered last time, but the attendance was, because it was, I think, around exam time. Oh no, it was around Ramadan time, just before Ramadan. So it was less attended. So inshallah ta'ala we'll do it as a recap. And I think it's a good way to start also the tafsir class, because it really drives home the point of why we're here in the first place. So we're going to be here on Mondays, inshallah. I think today's the only exception where we have till 6 because the room. I'm told by Brother Mustafa is that going forward, and the class is normally about an hour to 75 minutes, that there's going to be a room, inshallah, that's more permanent, so we're not bouncing from one place to the other, that will start from 5 and end at about 6:15. And we have the room till 6:30, but I don't like holding an hour and a half. I think it's too long. If we do have to break for salah though in between, it gives us that opportunity that we still have enough time to have the class and not compromise the time, so that we're not rushing through material. So stay tuned with respect to the room location, inshallah, but the time will be more fixed between 5 and 6:15. We'll have the room till 6:30, inshallah. We will end this class by Ramadan. Ramadan moves up every year, about 10 11 days, inshallah. So next year, in 2026, that is, it'll be in February, and closer to the middle of February. So the challenge with being on campus is you guys have reading week, which we never had when I was here. We had it second term, not first term. You guys are spoiled, I have to say. But it's nice to have the reading week to catch up. But there's also exam time. So midterms, you know, we don't cancel classes because of midterms. Again, this should be a priority on your list as your courses that you're taking, and if not more. And you won't necessarily appreciate that or realize that until later on in your life, when you realize that the Quran is actually your GPS to life. And if you don't invest time for it early, life will hit you with you know, bricks and obstacles and all sorts of difficulties and challenges on a communal level and on a personal level. And unfortunately, a lot of people start to deviate after university, because university are those years where you start to formulate your thinking, you start to see the world in a specific way, and you kind of start going that path. It's not to say people can't go back, of course they can, but starting off on a good, on the right footing is important, and inshallah ta'ala, I hope that this halaqah helps you there. So we will end, inshallah ta'ala, because of exams, we will carry a little bit into next term, the winter term, up till Ramadan, and then we will finish by then, inshallah. The references are listed here. If you wanted to access so it's what is presented here is a compilation of different tafsir, right? We're not going to go book by book and say Al-Tabari says this and Al-Qurtubi says that, and Sheikh Saeed Hawa says this. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is I'm going to try to deliver the meanings based on the various tafsir and approach it from a thematic perspective. Now, I encourage you to pick up the references and start reading them. We picked Juz al-Amma for a reason, and I'll share that reason soon, inshallah. There's Arabic and there's English texts, so I do encourage you to actually, go beyond this halaqah when you have time and start reading the tafsir. I think it's useful. Any questions so far on the course and the structure and the timing and the curriculum? Okay, very good. So here's just a difference between audit and credit. Audit, you can show up, listen, and you have no commitment essentially. I do though ask you, again, for your benefit, inshallah, try to, even if your audit, commit to coming. It's only an hour a week that you're dedicating to the Quran, and that's the minimum we should be giving, to be honest. So try your best to attend, and try to stay on, to come on time and stay till the end. It's again just about an hour and 15 minutes. If you are a credit student, attendance will be noted, inshallah. It's part of your mark, as well as the assignments. There's not many assignments. I think there's one or two over the course of the session, the term. And there will be a midterm and a final exam. Again, it's for your benefit to take them so that you to see if you understand the material or not. And inshallah, it'll be engaging, so it's not very difficult to remember. Okay. Any questions on credit or audit? Now, if you change your mind and you're just simply attending as a halaqah here, and you decide, you know what, I want to give it a shot and become a credit student, you're more than welcome to. You can speak to me afterwards, inshallah, and we can get you signed up. All right, so let's get to it, inshallah ta'ala. So, why Juz Amma? Maybe I'll rely on some people from the students that took this last year to help me answer. Why Juz Amma? Yes?
It's because what most people have it memorized and would be the most frequent in Salah.
Yes, so for sure. So the majority of people who have memorized anything from the Quran have memorized from Juz Amma, right? So Juz Amma is the most memorized juz in all of the Quran anywhere in the world, right? And it's made up of, and it's easy to memorize because the surahs are short, right? They're small doses of main concepts that are presented to us. So it's easy to memorize, and that's what we usually start off when we start to pray and we're growing up and so on. We start to learn these shorter surahs, and most people start from Juz Amma. Very rarely do you find, a 12-year-old that's memorized the first half of the Quran and doesn't know Juz Amma. Okay. Why else? Why do we cover Juz Amma? Yes. Yeah, so the Quran is 30 ajza, okay? And the Quran's message is summarized in the last chapter of the Quran, the 30th juz, 30th chapter. And of course the Quran is superior to any other book because it's divine. It's divinely revealed to us, to the Prophet ﷺ. And but as you can understand, books usually have the summary at the end. Juz Amma contains the summary of the main concepts of the message of Islam at the very end in this juz. And so the best place to start learning about the Quran is Juz Amma, because you will learn the gist and the summary of what the message is all about. Okay? And it's and to give you a perspective to kind of drive this point home, is that every surah in the Quran comes with a message. Every surah in the Quran has a concept, a main theme. Juz Amma, because it contains the most number of surah in the Quran, 37, it's got 37 themes that it presents, more than any other chapter, of course, because it's got the most number of surahs, and because it's the summary. Now, Surah Al-Baqarah has the main theme, but so does Surah Al-Ikhlas, right? The longest surah in the Quran, just like even Surah Al-Kawthar, which is the shortest surah, they both have one main theme. Surah Al-Baqarah goes on to elaborate and explain and provide analogies and stories and examples around that main theme. And Surah Al-Kawthar and Surah Al-Ikhlas just mention to you the main points. Right? And so Juz Amma really is a compilation of small pills, each containing the main concepts of Islam that are easy to swallow. And so that's why it's important to know this juz. Because it's, again, short surahs, but the main messages and concepts are in small pills that are easy to, quickly and easily, inshallah ta'ala, easy to learn. So that's why we talk about Juz Amma. Now, if you look at, for example, which surah from the long surahs, Sab'a Tuwal, talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Anyone know? The first 7 surahs after Fatiha are called the Sab'a Tuwal, the 7 long ones. Which surah talks about Allah as a main theme? Does anyone know?
Surah Maryam.
You're close in location, but it's not Surah Al-Maryam. An'am, right? So Surah Al-An'am is very long. It's approximately 20 pages. It talks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in Juz Amma, because it's the main concepts are small pills, right? Surah Al-Ikhlas. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Both of them talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One is very short. See the example? For instance, Surah Ibrahim and Surah Al-Hijr and Surah Al-Nahl talk about the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're fairly long. They're about 10, 12 pages. Surah Al-Rahman, which came in the 27th juz, talks about the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a shorter surah. But in Juz Amma, it's even shorter. Does anyone know which surah talks about the blessings of Allah in Juz Amma? Even shorter. Quraysh. لإيلاف قريش إيلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. Of course, when we get to the surah, we'll explain, we'll translate inshallah and we'll explain it. But the point is, it talks about the blessings of Allah and it's very concise. Again, small clip. And there's many examples how long surahs come and talk about a main theme and elaborate on it, and Juz' Amma is the summary of those. Okay? So that's why we cover Juz' Amma. Any questions on that part, inshallah? And feel free to ask any point. You don't have to wait for me to pause. Okay. Juz' Amma, based on some scholars, again, the breakdown of the Quran, and I encourage you to take Ulum al-Quran, which is offered on Thursdays at Wellness after Isha, this term, inshallah. We talk about the sciences of the Quran. The Quran is broken down. Well, maybe I'll explain this first. Who set the order of the Quran? The chapters. Who set the order? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Now, is the order that it was revealed, is it the same as the order that you find the Quran now?
No.
They are different. So, which one did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set? The one that was revealed or the one that we find in the actual physical book?
Both.
Both. Okay. So why are they different? Take Ulum al-Quran. So we're not going to answer that because it's going to take a little bit of time. But the point is that the Quran, how it's ordered, is set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, told to Jibreel alayhi salam, who taught the Prophet alayhi salam, and the Prophet salam commanded the Sahaba to put this surah in before this surah, these ayat in this surah, because some surahs were not revealed all at once because they're longer. And the Quran was gradually revealed over 23 years. And why 23 years? Why isn't it all of a sudden is one book as the other books? Again, there's a hikmah, there's a wisdom behind that. Take Ulum al-Quran. Okay? And so the order of surahs, the scholars have looked into why this order. Why did the Prophet ﷺ set the order, based on the commandments from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And there are tafsir that go into the breakdown of the bigger picture of the Quran. Right? So if you take a 50,000 foot view of the Quran, how many chapters are in the Quran? How many surahs? 114. Okay? The scholars have grouped them based on their order into groups. And those groups are covering specific themes. And within each theme, each surah tackles that theme differently. And so, Juz' Amma, similarly, as the whole Quran, some have broken it down into 4 areas, or 4 sections. We've covered section 1 and 2 last year. This year we'll continue on from section 3 and 4. We started section 3 last year as well. But what I will say is that section 1 focuses on the fundamental principles of the deen. The concept of tadayyun. Tadayyun is that you gravitate or you accept a certain way of life. Okay? So this is why the word tadayyun, which comes from deen. Deen, people translate as religion, which is a correct understanding. However, the more comprehensive meaning is the way of life. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts this juz' talking about the way of life from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perspective, beginning with Surah An-Naba. And this is why it starts with عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ. What are they discussing or arguing about or discussing about? عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ, the great news. Which news? The one that they are quarreling or disagreeing when they talk about. What is that news? It's the story of life. And if you go ask people outside, what's the purpose of life? What's the objective? Why are we here? Etc., etc. You'll get different answers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts his juz' and says, this is the real story. And so Surah An-Naba covers that. We covered that last year. The perspective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the truth about what this life is all about. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended that Surah An-Naba with the punchline, فَمَنْ شَاءَ اتَّخَذَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِ مَآبًا. Whoever chooses, after we learned about the story of life, whoever chooses, takes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their final destination. Because all destinations, by the way, lead to Allah. All of them lead to Allah. Some people take different paths to get to Allah, righteous people. There are many paths to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of good deeds. But there are also people that take the wrong paths. But those paths eventually lead back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Day of Judgment. Okay? And so if somebody decides, I will take it upon myself to make sure I go the path that Allah wants me to, then that person is successful. If somebody decides to go on a different path, well, guess what? You're going to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless. And then you're going to have to answer for what you have done and your choices in life. So the first cluster of surahs in Juz Amma talk about the fundamental principles, which include the story of life. Number 2 and number 3, the second and the third surah, which is Surah Al-Nazi'at and Abasa, talk about the most critical part of the equation of that story of life. The one that is the barrier to your success, but it is also the means to your success. And we're going to talk about that today, inshallah, in Surah Al-Juz. So I won't go into details with that. But it's that variable that actually is either going to help you or harm you. And that's the most important variable in this whole equation that we have control over. And then the third surah came to talk about the moral compass, the moral conduct. What is the expected conduct that we need to have? And it's set by the example. The only surah that actually that is attributed to a verb, something, an action that the Prophet ﷺ had done. And of all of the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, the incredible actions of sacrifice and leadership and love and compassion and mercy and all of the good deeds of the Prophet ﷺ that we try to emulate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala picked one to name after one of his actions, and that was he frowned. And by the way, nobody saw that frown, because the Prophet ﷺ had frowned in the face of a blind man. So the blind man didn't even see it. Nobody saw it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet Allah revealed it to be known until the Day of Judgment. Why? Because our actions are not based on what people think or what people set as expectations. Our moral behavior is based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. And He sees us and hears us all the time. So it doesn't matter, because a lot of things that we do are based on how people will feel, or how they'll think about us, or what the expectation is. That's secondary. What's primary is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you can do something that nobody hears or sees, and you're going to be held accountable to it, because that standard Allah sets, and He rebuked the Prophet ﷺ for it. So those 3 surahs make up the first section, first cluster of surahs that talk about the fundamentals of the deen, the way of life, tadayyun. The next cluster talk about choice, and there's nothing out there, no science, no religion, that addresses and talks about the concept of choice more than Islam. And there are 5 surahs that came and talked about choice from different angles, and that was the second cluster. Because if you look at outside what science says, right, what people think, there are people that still believe in constellations or the horoscope. Oh, I'm born in this month, therefore this, if I do this is going to happen to me. And they blame choices on different things. Or there are people who say, and Muslims, by the way, will say, this happened, I had no choice. I had no choice, this happened. No, you do have choice. Right? You do have a choice. And these surahs talked about that, so we're not going to go into those details. But that second cluster did talk about that very important concept. We're now in the third cluster. The third cluster talks about tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has equipped us with to face this challenge of life. And these are not tools that you can learn outside of Islam. Actually, no human can teach you these tools. These tools were taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are not something that you can arrive at just thinking about. These are divine tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so that we can face life. And these tools started with Surah Al-Tariq. Again, the points are there, so for those who didn't attend last year can understand. But Surah Al-Tariq talked about the concept of tawakkul, relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is tawakkul? If you ask even Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what is tawakkul? Nobody knew what that meant. What does that mean? And this is why I say it's things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us. These are not things you learn outside the deen. They're related to the deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they wouldn't have a meaning outside of Islam. This concept of tawakkul, relying upon Allah. The concept of tasbih by Surah Al-A'la. Al-Ghashiyah covered the concept of perseverance. Say, well, we know about perseverance. We think we know about perseverance, but what is the true meaning of perseverance? And when you're hit hard with different challenges, how are you supposed to respond? So Surah Al-Ghashiyah talked about that. Surah Al-Fajr talked about having proper perspectives. And the scholars have said two of the most important ayat in Juz' Amma, and some even said in the whole Quran, are in Surah Al-Fajr. Because so many people think a certain way and Allah came to correct that thinking. No, you need to have proper perspective. And then Surah Al-Balad talked about the constancy of values, how your values should never change, irrespective of your circumstance. And now inshallah ta'ala, we'll start with Surah Al-Shams. Now I have the difficult task of doing this in half an hour. So I'm going to do my best, inshallah. I'm not going to force the issue. If we don't finish, we don't finish. I'd rather you learn, inshallah, and contemplate than just try to get through material quickly. Surah Al-Shams talks about the concept of self-purification, to purify yourself. And this is extremely important in your time in your life, because in your time, university students, is a time of independence. It's a time where you start making your own choices and you have self-discovery. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is where you start to take a path and you start to blaze that path. And a lot of people, unfortunately, lose their way at this time of their life. And some people find themselves. So when we go into university, we always think about what I want myself to look like when I graduate. What do I want to come out with university with? Learned what? What skills and knowledge? What degree and credentials? How many of us ask, though, how do I want my soul to look like after I leave university? There's a lot of temptations. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of desires at this time of people's lives, especially in the context of university. And there's a lot of struggles. And so the importance of looking inward. Remember how I just mentioned with Surah Al-Nazi'at, which also talked about this concept from a different perspective? But there's that one thing that is your barrier to your success, but also your means to your success. Does anyone know who I'm referring to, or what I'm referring to? Yes.
The nafs.
Yes, the nafs. Your nafs. Your soul. I shouldn't say soul. In English, it's the translations aren't the best. I will say yourself. And that self is comprised of two components, which we'll talk about, inshallah. But yourself, your inner self, that could lead you to astray or could lead you to the right path. We need to focus more on that self. And this surah comes to show us, to talk about the importance of that. And if we don't, then there's consequences. And Allah actually brings an example of people who left themselves kind of go astray and what happened to them. And so when you think about you want to leave this place and change the world, you can't change the world without changing yourself. And it's the moral compass within you that's very important to fix first. Because a lot of people, I'll tell you this from experience, I'm probably more than double most of you in age. Okay, I'll say that comfortably. There are people that realize they've been climbing the wall all their life and working hard and striving, and then by the time they're 50 or 55, they realize, oops, I'm climbing up the wrong wall. everything they've done to climb up is a waste. You go back down and go to the other wall, fix yourself. You have that opportunity. You haven't climbed very much yet. You may think you have, but you haven't. There's a lot that's going to happen, and I ask Allah to make your path easy and full of blessings. But there are going to be things that are going to perhaps distract you. And so this surah will cover that, inshallah. The surah, before we start, so this surah has different names. The names are given something that the Prophet ﷺ used to refer to the surah. So Surah Ash-Shams is the most common name, but there are instances and reports that the Prophet ﷺ sometimes referred to it as Surah Wash-Shamsi wa Duhaha, which is the first ayah. Okay? You'll notice some surahs are, have maybe one or two few names, and some have more names. Okay? So try to kind of present it before we start. Any questions on this intro before we get into the surah and read it? Okay, so let's start reading, inshallah. So I know the English is there, so if I say something that's different than the English, again, the English is there to just help guide you to kind of understand what the ayah is saying. I don't rely on this for the explanation, because this is just simply a translation. And translations are by humans, and they're prone to error. Right? The Arabic's what's revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I say something that doesn't necessarily align 100% with some of these words, remember, my source is the different interpretations by different scholars, so it's a lot deeper than just the translation. Because I usually get those questions. It says here, but you said this. All right? So let's start, inshallah ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
والشمس وضحاها.
والشمس وضحاها.
So what we're going to do, inshallah ta'ala, so I usually have them in sections like this. What we'll do is we'll read a few ayat and then we'll explain them. So that every time I stop, it's because these ayat are short, know that it's the end of the ayah, okay? So that you're not confused. وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا.
وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا.
وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا.
وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا.
وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا.
وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا.
وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا.
وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا.
وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا.
وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا.
ونفس وما سواها.
ونفس وما سواها.
فألهمها فجورها وتقواها.
فألهمها فجورها وتقواها.
We'll stop at 8, inshallah, and we'll talk about 9 and 10. And the reason why we're stopping at 8 is because the surah starts with oaths. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes oaths in the Quran, throughout the Quran. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes oaths, there are two things you need to remember. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking the oath by, and what comes after the oath? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to take an oath, right? To show importance, to get our attention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes these oaths. It's as if I say to you, Wallahi al-azim, uqsim billah, Wallahi al-azim. If I say that to you twice or 3 times, gets your attention. What is he about to say? Why is he swearing by Allah? He must be trying to emphasize something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to emphasize a meaning for us, even though all of the Quran is important. Okay? So, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes oaths by His creation. By the way, we are not allowed to take oaths by Allah's creation. We're only allowed to take an oath by Allah. Okay? So if you hear people taking an oath by the Prophet ﷺ, like when Nabi, which is very common, or Hayat al-Quran and all, that's wrong. Okay? You are not allowed to take an oath by anything but Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by His creation, so what He's taking an oath by is important, and what comes after the oath is important. This surah is the surah that has the most consecutive oaths out of any other surah in the Quran. So the oath after oath, all the way up to ayah 8. There's 8 ayats, 11 oaths in total. Which means what's coming is extremely important. Again, Allah doesn't need to take an oath, and if He does, subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes it's 1 oath or 2 oaths. Right? In Surah Al-Nazi'at, it was about 5 oaths. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ, right? وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقِ, for example, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes, وَالشَّمْسِ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى, different oaths Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes. This has the most. And so what's coming after these oaths is extremely important. But before we talk about what comes after, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take an oath by? وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, by the sun and duhaha. Duhaha comes from the word duha, which is the brightest part of the day. Okay? Just before the sun hits the peak. And I'm not going to talk too much about the sun, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala picks the sun. It's an incredible creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without the sun, we wouldn't exist, and nothing else would. So, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. So, by also the moon. Okay? And what's interesting is, talaha means to follow. So, by the moon that follows the sun. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا. And by the day, nahar is day, Jallaha means it's something that was hidden that all of a sudden it was uncovered. Jallaha. So you had nighttime, the things were hidden, and then the daytime came and it revealed all that was hidden. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, and by the night and what it comes to cover. Okay. وَالسَّمَاءِ وَمَا بَنَاهَا, and by the sky and what things went into creating it. وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا, and the earth, and the word طَحَا means to level. The earth was leveled so that we can live on it. Imagine that the earth was all boulders and mountainous, terrain and rugged. You couldn't build anything, you can put roads, you can walk, you can do anything. وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا طَحَاهَا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leveled it. So by the earth and what it took to level it. All of these things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning are things that are beyond our control. We have no power over. We have no control over. All of these creations, you and I have no power over and no control. But what we do have is control over the next one. And the next one is ayah 7. Okay? And this is basically the point of the surah. So the first 6 talked about creation, and now we talk about the nafs. وَالنَّفْسِ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. And by the self and what went into making it and creating it. Now what's the nafs? The nafs is composed of 2 elements. Ar-ruh, the soul. What is the soul? We don't know. All we know is it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blew into Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, and we all have. It's a nafkha from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the heavenly component. The second component is the physical body, which is the earthly component. When these 2 came together, they gave you the nafs. Now, the heavenly component is the pure component. It's pure, it's clean. The earthly component is the one that's contaminated. Okay? And we'll talk more about what those 2 terms mean because they're coming up in the next few ayat. But if you think about creation on earth, animals, what does a male lion do when it comes into a new tribe? You don't know?
It attacks the existing dominant male.
It kills it kills the dominant male and pretty much all the other males because it doesn't want anybody else to take over. It wants to rule. That animal behavior, right? Of I want power, so I kill. Or simply, when you see an animal that runs after its prey or its meal, right? They prey on it. If you offer a hungry animal a meal in front of them, something they consume 10 times, 10 times out of 10 they'll eat it. 10 times out of 10 they'll eat it. That's the animalistic behavior. Right? That's the earthly component. And we don't want to be like that. We have both, the heavenly and the earthly. They come together and make the self. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has basically, after these oaths, here's the punchline. Here's what's important. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it both its righteousness and its corruption. So every soul that's created, every nafs that's created, has the righteous and the corrupt. All of us have this, by the way. All of us. So what's the main message? Let's read together. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا
من زكاها
وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا.
وقد خاب من دساها.
So after all these oaths, the last of which is, and by the self, and what came into, what took to make it, the things that went into it to make it, which are basically your soul and your body, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful is the one who purifies it. Because remember, you have an earthly component that needs purification. You and I, when we see food, we have to control ourselves. And by the way, that's part of Ramadan, right? It's discipline. When we see something we want, but we shouldn't take, because it's not rightfully ours or it's haram, we have to have control. That control comes from what? From purification. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Indeed, successful. Aflah means success. But it's different than najah. Najah in Arabic also means success. But Allah didn't say قَدْ نَجَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Najah is an earthly or is a worldly success. Dunya. You're successful in dunya. So you did well on your exam, najaht. You're successful. Aflah is success in dunya and akhirah. So you want success in both dunya and akhirah? Purify yourself. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, successful in both dunya and akhirah is the one who purifies himself. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Zakkaha is to purify. What does that mean? I'm going to list a bunch of ideas for you. And I'll ask you to note them down and reflect upon them later. Because we all need to reflect. This is a reflection exercise for you and I. How do we know how we're doing? I'm going to throw out a few questions or a few scenarios. And you go home and you evaluate yourself. And these are not, these are not complete by any means. But just to give you an idea of what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to have a pure soul, a pure nafs? So, zakah is when you stand up in prayer and you have complete khushu' and you don't get distracted by anything else. And your whole focus is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Zakah is when He subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to do something and you don't find ways to avoid or ask scholars about difference of opinion. You know, Allah asked this, I do it. Allah refrained this or prohibited this, I do it. That's zakah. I don't need to understand why. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to tell us why. Sometimes many times He's merciful with us and He tells us why. But why don't you eat pork? Why don't you drink alcohol? Subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, for alcohol at least, doesn't tell us about pork. Why? Doesn't say why. We have the science, but Allah doesn't say why. So we don't eat it because Allah said. Alcohol, Allah said there's a benefit in it, but the benefit does not. It's outweighed by the repercussions and the cons. Don't drink it. So, how do we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments? Zakah is to follow the commandments, and I don't need to understand why. I can look into it, but that doesn't necessitate me following it. Zakah is when somebody is doing better than you in dunya, your favorite thing. If it's a sport, or if it's your class, or if it's a job, a person's doing better than you, and you actually are happy for them. That's zakah. You don't have any jealousy or envy. You actually make dua for them. That's zakah. Zakah is when you succeed or you do well in something you worked so hard for, and then when you do well, you say, this is not because of me. You really understand that it's not because of me, it's because of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that allowed me to prepare and gain the skills and knowledge and set me up for success so I can attain it. Without Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, I couldn't have done it. Versus, yeah, it's my effort. Yes, it's my knowledge. Yes, it's my experience. Zakah is the other one. Zakah is you attribute success to Allah and only Allah. Because it's only Allah. It's only Allah. If you do well and if you get a gold medal in your degrees, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you the gold medal when you graduate out of fourth year, had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taken away your hearing or your sight, you wouldn't have been able to get it. So it's all because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Zakah is when you look at your flaws and you don't admire yourself and see yourself better than other people. Zakah, you see somebody that's doing something that they shouldn't be doing and you don't feel superior to them. And by the way, that's something we need to be careful, because sometimes we walk and we see people behaving a certain way or drinking and we think, yeah, we're better. However, their physical action that's wrong may be not as bad as a disease we have in our heart, like arrogance, of which if you have a mustard seed worth of arrogance, you will never enter Jannah. Yes.
I also feel like, just on this point, something that always pops into my head is, it's like a quote about, there's no pride in not following to a sin that you don't have a temptation for in the first place. That you can never feel proud that you are not committing a sin somebody else is, because you might not have the same struggle or the same tendencies, and your sins are not as visible.
Correct. Zakah is when you don't do haram because you know He's watching, even though there's nobody else around. Zakah is when you go on your cell phone when you're by yourself and you don't waste time. You're using that time to get better and get closer to Him. So there's many examples. These are some just to evaluate ourselves. And maybe one more. Zakah is somebody harms me. And yes, we should protect ourselves from harm. If it's a pattern, then we should definitely avoid that person. But we still forgive. Can you forgive? It's hard. It's one of the hardest things I've had in my life. The experience to forgive someone who's harmed you. And forgive somebody who's harmed you on purpose. Even harder. Yes?
I have a question about, I understand the action ones, like you don't do something wrong, but in terms of feeling, like when it comes to diseases of the heart, like jealousy and envy and like all the other ones, or arrogance, like if you feel that and you know, like you don't want to
Yes.
feel it, but it's like sometimes it feels involuntary, or you feel. So what do you do with that?
Very good, because this actually takes me to the point that I wanted to share next. All of us, by the way, if you don't have these challenges, there's something wrong with you, okay? Because you're created with these challenges. Okay? So don't feel bad, right? Don't feel bad that that person just keeps beating me or doing better than me, and I really want to be better, and I want to be on top. Don't feel bad that you feel this way. Okay? You should definitely strive to be better, not because of that person, but because you should be better. Now, we were all created, again, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. The two punchlines of the surah, after 11 oaths. So we have in ourselves a struggle. So all of us have within us the natural tendency of a human, which is jealousy, envy, element of arrogance, showing off, self-righteousness. These things exist. Okay? Different people have different extents. So desires, for example, we all have desires. Some people could care less, some men could care less about, the opposite gender hanging out with them. They care more about material things and cars and status. And some, they care about, fahisha. Everybody's got a struggle, or multiple struggles. But we all have within us the basic ones, to different degrees. And the fact, when we evaluate ourselves, we look into ourselves and say, do we feel this way? Or do we behave this way? It's for us to reflect so we can change. So it is normal to feel, oh, I felt this way. But then you need to self-talk. That self-talk over and over. Umar radiallahu anhu used to do it loudly. He used to scold himself loudly when he would think or say something that he shouldn't have. So self-talk. But that self-talk has to be based on something. Based on what's here. And what's here depends on what you feed it. What are the inputs to your mind? Who do you listen to? What do you read? Who do you interact with? Who do you friend? And this is why the Quran is so important. Because this is what feeds your mind and changes your heart. Because the mind is what impacts the heart. And it tells, the heart is an emotional state. It loves and it hates, and so if it loves and hates, it commands the parts of the body to do things. So if I love, chasing this world and trying to get status and power and wealth, my mind will tell my body to work in whatever capacity to gain that knowledge, to gain that status and wealth, even if I walk over people's necks. Because the heart loves material things and wealth. So it commands the body to do things. But, and this is the hadith of the Prophet, right? That if there's a piece of flesh in your body, إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. There's a piece of flesh in your body, if it's good, the whole body will be good. If it's corrupt, the whole body will be corrupt. Indeed, that piece of flesh is your heart. So the heart commands. But the heart has what governs the body is the heart. But the governor has an advisor. That advisor is the mind. The mind is what tells the heart, you should love this and you should hate this. And so if you love making money at any cost and you want to engage in riba, right? You will gain riba and you'll make money off of people's backs. But then the mind, if it's fed properly, if it reads the Quran, it knows that يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Allah destroys interest and usury, and He rewards and He increases sadaqah. So imagine, you talk to Joe off the street and say, give your money to charity or accept interest. To them, interest brings me more money, charity decreases my wealth. No, I'd rather get interest. Allah says, no, that's not how it works. How it works is, interest destroys your wealth. Even if when you collect it, it destroys your wealth. And when you give charity, it increases your wealth. That understanding is fed to the brain. How does the brain get it? From the Quran. When the mind gets that understanding, it starts to command the heart, love giving for the sake of Allah and hate, otherwise. And so this is why it's so important to focus on the self, and the self-feed is from the mind. So I think yes, question?
Yes, I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the point, where you look at your flaws and you don't feel happy.
Yeah. So maybe we'll open it up for questions, inshallah ta'ala, and because we're almost at 6, and then we'll continue next week. So I will answer your question, but next week, inshallah ta'ala, I think it's the same time. I think it's going to be the same location unless otherwise communicated. It's not?
Different room.
Different room? Okay. Stay tuned for a different room. We will continue the rest of the surah, which talks about the example of a people who neglected their self-purification and what happened to them. Okay? Allah gives us that example. It's very clear. And this is how you can understand how people can go out and kill kids and women and starve people to death and they don't feel guilty about it. How? It's this. This is corrupt. And the example of Thamud is mentioned as well. Now, with respect to your question, you're focused more on how do you, what was the last part of the question?
Like one of the points you mentioned is that when you look at your flaws and like what you feel how sometimes don't get
You look at your flaws and you say, how do I fix them? So you have to be in tune with your emotional state and your mental state. This is why it's very important journaling is very important, by the way. So you put things down, even if it's in your phone, so that when you, at the end of the day, you look back and say, oh, I felt this way. I shouldn't have felt this way. Or I behaved this way. You know, when people got together, all our friends, they're talking about somebody who's not there. And sometimes you laugh or you throw in a few words and then you feel guilty afterwards. Right? Note that. At the end of the day, say, why did I say that? Did I laugh because I think I'm better than that person? Or am I trying to fit in with this group? Like what, and then try to pinpoint exactly what the cause of you participating in the backbiting. So that needs a lot of contemplation, reflection, asking yourself questions that the nafs, by the way, doesn't like to answer. But that's why قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. That's why it's purifying, it's very important because you want honesty. Because your nafs will always deflect. No, I was, I overlooked it. And we give excuse after excuse. And that's the problem. The excuses are just a way to get away from facing your nafs and saying saying to it, what you did is wrong. Does that answer your question?
I have another perspective. So do you think there's ever like a state of mind, like mental disorder or anything that kind of like that places a barrier between the person and the self-purification thing? Like, do you think people with like depression or anxiety or
Yes.
similar
Okay,
conditions?
I got you. So let me start off by saying there are actually medical, like we're not talking about clinical cases of depression that have to do with chemical imbalance. So that is separate, right? Because that's more on the physical, like your anatomy, your physiology. But however, sometimes we might feel down to the point we are actually depressed. But it's the other part of depression that I actually like to speak about, because I'm not qualified to speak on that other one, obviously. But that one is, sometimes we justify and say, oh, they're depressed, or they just have a depression. That depression could be the how we think and we view the world. And that needs to be fixed. And so this is why it's extremely important, like we talked about Surah Al-Fajr, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the example of the person who قَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restricted their provision, so they think to themselves, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy with me, He's humiliating me, He doesn't like me, nobody likes me. No, right? Have the proper perspective, you need to fix that. And so that's the part of the depression, of the mental state, that is, and from a statistics point of view, that's the majority of people. That's not to say there are real cases of mental health that need to be addressed, definitely. But a lot of them we shouldn't lump it all in one and say, nope, mental health, forget it. Don't talk about it, let the experts. No. There are certain things, how we think and we view ourselves and other in the reality makes a big difference. And the Quran came to fix all of that. Yes. Khalas? There's nobody here. Okay. No, they are here, okay. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your time that you came to devote to the Quran. Inshallah, next week we'll continue with the surah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خير. And if you decide you want to register, let me know, inshallah. I do have a meeting at 6:15, so I'd have to run today, but you can let me know as well next